Y is recorded in front of a live studio audience.
Hello there, and welcome to the show. Unfortunately, or fortunately, you just have me this week. Heidi is in Las Vegas with the DJ. If you know what we're doing outside of the podcast, that just got a lot funnier. But today we are talking with Grace Cowan from we always say it's not a political show, and it's not, but we are talking with Grace Cowan from Frogmore Stew, which is a political podcast. Really interesting talk, South Carolina politics and all of that entails. So enjoy. Heidi will be back sooner than you think, or something like that.
This is Why, with your hosts, Heidi Hedquist and Luke Poling.
What I know about South Carolina, I want to say politics, I guess, begins begins and ends with Francis Marion, the Swamp Fox.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so that's about it.
Okay.
I can kind of hum the theme song, but that's again, this is my level. But listening to the show, it's really interesting because it has a South Carolina bent for sure,
Yeah.
but it's something that it feels like a really nice sort of summation in some episodes, history lesson.
Sure.
What was that the goal in starting the show? What was the kind of origin story of it?
Yes, 100%. I think the origin story is, I have worked in politics for the last 6 years in some form or fashion. And I feel like the more that people asked me questions about a candidate I was, supporting or policy that I was talking about, the more I realized how little people knew about the history of politics and how all of history directly affects what's happening now, and how so many characters. I mean, South Carolina has a ton of characters, from Lee Atwater to Strom Thurmond, people that really changed the game in the name of politics. And we still have some people working in the state that are affecting the national scene as well as our state scene. So I think that was kind of the how do we tie in a few little history lessons about interesting characters, but also show how they sort of, changed the landscape of what politics looks like today.
And when you say, I feel like you're giving it short shrift to say like, oh, they played a hand in this. When you talk about someone like Phyllis Schlafly,
Right.
that's a pretty big thumb on the scale of what
Yeah.
one's trying to do. Why is it South Carolina that all these people come from?
Well, she's
I
not actually
again,
from South Carolina,
but
but
like Lee Atwater, I mean,
Lee
these
Atwater.
are
Yeah.
these
Strom
are
Thurmond. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Lots. Yeah. And now we have, well, for example, we have a guy named Jim DeMint, who runs a think tank here called Palmetto Promise, very much moving the needle in South Carolina politics, and has done so on the national level at the Heritage Foundation. Lindsey Graham, I think, is a mover and a shaker when it comes to, the national scene of politics. And Nikki Haley, we had two presidential candidates this year. We had Tim Scott and Nikki Haley, and we're not that big of a state.
And you're
We're
0 for 2, let's be honest. I
and we're 0
mean,
for 2 for sure. But I think we are oftentimes a state that gets pegged as a certain type of thing, and primarily as a deep red state. And we're not really that. I mean, when you look at our national elections, on a statewide level, we have about 3.5 million voters. And the difference between Republicans and Democrats out of those 3.5 million voters is 250,000 people. So it's not that big of a spread. But because of some of our foundational state systems, we are very gerrymandered. We don't have voter enrollment at the DMV. We don't have, you can't go do a citizen referendum. That's impossible to do here in this state. There are things like that that are really foundational, structural foundations that will continue us to to stay a red state, but the actual people in the state aren't all that red. And we have, Charleston is one of our big cities, Greenville City and Columbia are all blue cities in a very red bubble of a state.
It's so interesting because, yeah, I would normally think it is a red state, but clearly it's much more purple than that.
For sure.
How long has this sort of eh, swerved towards gerrymandering and kind of, again, putting your thumb on the scale of
Yeah.
we're going to go this way? How long has that been happening, and how long has there been this sort of seemingly concerted effort to at least inform people, like, hey, here's what's happening in your neighborhood?
Yeah. So really, it goes back to 1992. And that was sort of, the Clinton era, um, and the old hold of the Democrat Party was just sort of starting to let go of the flip to like Southern Democrats to Republicans. And in 1992, well, I'll give you an example. So our state legislature currently in the state house is 88 Republicans to 36 Democrats. And in our state Senate, it's 30 Republicans to 15 Democrats and one independent. And if you go back to 1992, it was almost reversed from Republicans to Democrats. And so what started happening in 92 is little by little, that 92 to 94 race in the state house, I think they lost like 8 or 9 seats. It was a big jump. But then from there, it kept going 2 seats here, 2 seats there, 2 seats here. And then what happened when, like around 2010, which was that big push by Karl Rove to take over state legislatures, you really saw this momentum in the state legislature to start really pinpointing redistricting. So in 2000, then they completely redistricted where the states were. I'm sorry, where the districts were. And then 2010, it got even more significant. In 2020, they had a pretty good settling in of, what those districts looked like, and they could pinpoint like this row of houses are Democrats, so we're going to put them in these districts. And so they've really cracked and packed our entire state. So it's virtually impossible now for Democrats to take back over the state legislature
Oh,
or
that's
even
depressing.
become purple. Yeah, it is
Right.
depressing. Yeah. But it's things like an independent redistricting committee would change the foundation. I mean, I call it like redlining or segregation
Mhm.
for voting, which is what it is. And we as a community, as a country, are against segregation in our schools or in our neighborhoods. But in voting, it's okay because it's perfectly legal to redistrict based on partisanship.
And is there, I'm going to guess the Democratic side is obviously against all of this. Um, are there Republicans on the side of like, let's just be fair about this thing, or is it always just you want to be on the side that's winning and
So
screw the other guy?
yeah, I have Republicans on my show a lot. Those topics, usually get pivoted away from when you bring those up.
Hmm.
Or they, many conservative people down here will just say that, but that's what's legal. So of course, and if the Democrats were in charge, they would do it too, or the Democrats do it in New York, or the Democrat. But there are other ways that I bring up, which people often don't know what to say to this. But for example, having a full-time state legislature is critical to states being fair. And 27 other states have that. And what that means is our state legislature right now is part-time. So you go to Columbia from January until the beginning of June, and sometimes you get called back and you make $10,000, just a little over $10,000 a year to be a state house rep or state senator. So think about who the people are that can take those jobs, can be out of their jobs for 5 months
Yeah.
and live on $10,000 a year. There are very few people. So it's either very wealthy people, lawyers that don't have to be in court the whole time. Very specific group of people. And so just by making that change, you change who's in your legislature, and it changes, a lot of the foundational beliefs of what's coming out of your government.
We often joke on our show that we are not a political show. That said, if you want to have intercourse with the ottoman, we might want to step outside and ask a few questions. But are you finding, are the sides closer together, or are they as far apart as they've ever been? Because it seems like there's a pretty great divide between the two sides.
Yeah. So I don't try to look at it as sides, right? The way that I see our state is from the voter rolls, you can see that about 60% of the Republican voters vote straight ticket, which leaves 40% of Republican voters that have an open mind, in my opinion, right? And on the
Mhm.
Democrat side, about 40% of the Democrats in our state vote straight party ticket. So that leaves 60% that are sort of like, I don't know what party I belong to, right? Or maybe they do feel like they lean left, but they're open to talking to the other side. So I feel like those are the people that I need to speak to the most, because I feel like I am part of that group that's like, I certainly feel a certain way about certain topics. Abortion is one for me that I feel very strongly about, but there are others that I don't have a super strong opinion to. And so I try to go into every interview with a Republican, a Democrat, and independent with this from this place of my mind isn't already made up. I'm not
Mhm.
here trying to convince anyone. I'm open to new ideas. And the example that I like to give when people say, "Well, how do you do that?" is, 20 years ago I bought an iPhone. And when I bought that iPhone, I thought it was better than the BlackBerry, but my husband tried to convince me that it wasn't better than the BlackBerry. And over time, that iPhone that I bought now, I don't think that one was so great. The one I have now, I think is awesome, but you probably couldn't have convinced me back then that what I have now is as awesome as it is. And so I just feel like we're always progressing and moving and changing, and new things happen that help us change our opinions on things. And so I feel like there's 40% of Republican voters that feel that way and 60% of Democrat voters that feel that way. And so it's sort of, my job with the platform I have to talk to those people and make sure that we're all hearing each other.
Well, and it's interesting because listening to the show at first blush, you can't really. It's not. It's not telegraphed. It's not super obvious that this is the side of the political spectrum that you are at least leaning towards.
Sure.
That it seems like it's an attempt to try to make it as sort of centrist and, to coin a phrase, fair and balanced, that everyone is getting the chance to put out
Yes,
their viewpoints,
right.
and we want to hear all sides, and we're going to kind of present this stuff and sort of say, well, it's up to you. I mean, even the
Sure.
way, in talking about Phyllis Schlafly and what she's
Yeah.
done, it's very much like, well, here is what she hath wrought, but you know, there's no like this woman has completely torn asunder some basic things. And I mean, even the way you kind of really highlight the fact the way she formatted arguments and formatted speeches,
Yeah.
and then, one episode back, the idea of this conversation of the words that people are using in
Right.
speech to try to sway somebody one way or the other.
Right.
Um, was that always your goal to sort of reach
Yeah.
everybody, basically?
I mean, I want I certainly have my opinions, and I do say them on I do, let my opinion fly free when it comes up. But I also feel like everyone else has their opinion. And I have never met a person that says I'm a radical. Every person I've ever spoken to says I'm a moderate. But they're a moderate because they're surrounded by people that behave and think similarly to the way that they do. And so to them, they see themselves as a moderate, as we all do. And so I think in doing the podcast, there are a million podcasts that you can listen to go into your silo and say, I need to be reinforced with what I believe. And there are a million podcasts you can go into outside of your silo to be pissed off,
Mhm.
and let yourself get angry. But I don't know that there are a ton of podcasts that you can listen to and learn a piece of history, that you're allowed to walk away and go, well, Phyllis Schlafly created the religious right, and that pisses me off. But I also feel like she was a formidable woman, and she was poised and graceful, and would put herself out there on talk shows. I mean, if you Google any videos of her, she was on every talk show. She sat across from every hardcore feminist and took it, and then gave it back and wasn't afraid. And, I wholeheartedly disagree with almost everything that she said and everything that she did, but that doesn't take away from her putting out what I don't even believe she thought. I think she thought it was all bullshit. I think she, like Lee
Hmm.
Atwater, just wanted to win. And I don't think Lee Atwater was a Republican, and I don't think he was a Democrat. I think he just was all about winning. I think he was politically agnostic.
So interesting, especially, I mean, you look at the documentary about him and how there seems
Yes,
to be this perhaps conversion or regret towards the end of his life of like,
for
"Ooh,
sure.
what have I done here?"
Yeah.
Um,
We have a piece coming up on Willie Horton. Do you know
oh,
who Willie Horton is?
I grew up in Massachusetts,
Yeah. Oh,
so
yeah.
I'm
Okay.
well familiar with his work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for your listeners, if you don't know who Willie
Yes.
Horton is, Google Willie Horton in his role in the Dukakis Bush election. And Lee Atwater had a really big piece. I mean, it was his idea to do this ad on this Black man, Willie Horton, who to make the race racial and to turn it into fear of Michael Dukakis, like freeing scary people to white people, scary Black people to white
Mhm.
people. And that's it literally changed the course of the race. And yet Lee Atwater, was a blues musician, and his idols were these amazing Black men, but he went out and created a racial disaster in the United States. And it just, I find characters like him to be so destructive to humanity, and yet also so self-destructive. And in the end, I think like what he was feeling about himself, there's an old story about his baby brother, he basically watched his baby brother die in the kitchen. He was burned so badly that he died in the hospital, and he saw that as a young child. And I think that he was dead inside, and so he didn't really care what he did. He just literally wanted to make himself feel better, and he felt better by winning.
Politics is always framed in a very personal setting, and even that story
Yeah,
is incredibly personal.
yeah.
Do you find that the people you're talking to and the people you're covering, is it more often than not people are doing something because they truly believe it and have this, for lack of a better term, faith of like, this is how I think things should go, and it's an honest disagreement over a belief structure of some sort?
I
Or are there
do.
people who just want to watch it burn?
No, I do. I mean, we took on the task, my Friday co-host Caitlin Brewer and TJ Phillips, our producer, of inviting everyone running in the primaries to come onto our show. And we did 15-minute segments where we asked basically the same questions to everybody across the board. And there were some serious characters running in the state. And one that I bring up a lot is this man in Kershaw County who has been overseas multiple times in the military. I am based in Charleston, and we
Mhm.
cover the whole state, but most people know we're in Charleston, and Charleston is known as Rhett Butler said in Gone with the Wind, excellent manners and questionable morals. And so people from around the state often say, well, that's where all the liberals live, whatever. And so this guy got on and he said, oh, I'm sorry, I'm out of breath. I was outside shooting my AR-15. And he wanted a reaction out of me. But
Mhm.
when we got into the details of why he was so passionate about his AR-15, he's in the military. He was overseas, and his security blanket was his gun while he was in the military. And he probably has a lot of PTSD, and he, is genuinely afraid of a lot of things that you and I, not having lived in a war zone, would wake up in the middle of the night afraid of. And so it gave sort of a humanity to his story. There's another guy that's a constitutional lawyer in Anderson County. He did not win, neither did the Kershaw County guy. But he started off when I asked, what are the top 3 issues in your district? And remember, he's running for state house. He said the border. And I was like,
North Carolina, right?
Yeah, I was like,
Yeah.
the border of Anderson County? Like, what do you mean? And he was like, no, the border in Mexico. And he went through this whole thing on why people in Anderson County should be afraid of illegal immigrants breaking into homes in Anderson County with guns. And I think he was genuine, but I don't see that as being an issue. And so I certainly don't argue with people over what their true beliefs are, but I also think that people's beliefs are intimidated by their bubbles.
When you have folks on the show, are you trying to present them a certain way? Are you trying to sort of, again, rebalance the scales, or is it much more a case of, I want to give the listeners an honest representation of you, and if you end up hoist by your own petard, it happens.
I love that word, petard.
It's a really good one, isn't it?
It's a great word.
Yeah,
Yes. This is way more serious of a conversation than I thought we were going to have, by the way.
Well, usually it's a lot of weird questions about
I know.
sandwiches.
Lisa
Yeah.
Liu is a friend of mine from New
Oh,
York.
okay.
And I listened to hers and I was like, this is going to be like a happy hour, cocktail hour. When
I don't want to say that Heidi's the root of all of that, but it makes it easier when there's 2 of us, where one of us asks the smart questions and the other one's just in the corner asking about dumb stuff.
I like the smart questions. And I was on Fox 24, our local Fox affiliate, yesterday, and she asked me very serious questions. So I'm prepared.
Oh, okay, good.
But what I will say is, when I have people on the show, one of my biggest frustrations with our media right now is this constant necessity to have point counterpoint. And there's that famous show that Tucker Carlson was on, that Jon Stewart went on and blew it up. I love that clip, because I don't necessarily think it constantly has to be, here's the far left's view and here's the far right's view, and this is fair journalism. I think that fair journalism is a Walter Cronkite type of journalism, which is, here's the story. It's not coming from my perspective. This is just the story. And you can walk away from this story with whatever resonates with you. And I will acknowledge that I have my personal beliefs, but I try not to gear the story into one stripe or the other. So when I have people on, I have there's a guy named Will Folks, who has I like to call it our South Carolina's version of the New York Post. It's sort of this salacious news outlet. But I have him on often, and I love to talk to him because he is very knowledgeable and deep-seated in his beliefs, and they are often very different than mine. But it's not done as like a point counterpoint. It's done as he's telling his view of the policy or the story or whatever it is.
And you said you started this whole thing as a way to reach out to folks and let them know some of the history and origin story for some of these things that perhaps they didn't know. Do you hear back from listeners? Is it sort of having its intended effect, or is it doing what you thought it would do, or is it doing something else?
It is. So my goal was to reach people. I don't like this term, but it's being used a lot in this election cycle, which is low information voters. And that doesn't mean no information are not smart voters. It means smart people that could give two shits about politics and don't want to deal with politics. They're too busy, right? And so the goal was do a 30 minutes or less piece every week or twice a week, and hit on some things that are pop culture, but also political. And maybe that will interest some people to just pay attention a little bit more, because there are things happening right now that are deeply effective, particularly to women. And so yes, I feel like I've had a lot of women especially come up to me and say, I had no idea. I didn't know this was going on, because also primarily a lot of men read CNBC or listen to CNBC or read the Wall Street Journal. And I'm saying that sounds very sexist, but I think their listenership and readership is probably higher men than women. And I think women are more focused on what the kids' schedule is, what the food schedule is, what games you have this weekend, that kind of stuff. And so I think this is an easily digestible pop culture political podcast that's in real speak.
And how long have you been doing it now?
Almost a year.
So I guess there hasn't been maybe a primary since you started?
Yeah, so we had the presidential primary in, when was that? March,
Yeah,
April?
who knows now?
There were two, like 100 years ago.
Right.
And then we had our the presidential primary was in February, and I think our Dem primary was in June, and the Republican primary was just before that.
Have you seen any result, any turnaround from the show? Or is there a way to kind of, not to be that person saying, well, what's the,
Yeah.
end result of this?
So what I will say is, I mean, I think, the thing that stands out to me the most about this year's election statewide, out of 124 state house races, we have 60 of them that only have one candidate. Out
Wow.
of 46 state Senate races, I don't know the exact number, but it's some percentage wise about the same. And so, it's hard to tell movement when you have numbers that are that big without even a candidate. I think that I, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I haven't really gone back and done like a deep dive check into it. I will say that from interviewing so many of the people throughout the state in the primaries, people have come up to us or emailed us and said, I had no idea that's who was running in the primary. I had no idea that's what people thought, or that's what, I think it opened a lot of people's eyes. And I don't think people pay attention to the state primaries very often in any state. Ours is about 10% of voters who actually vote in the state primaries.
Given the fact that you've been involved in politics in some shape or form for a while, you've been doing the show, you are obviously more informed on the I don't want to say candidates, the characters, and the topics on hand. And obviously, when one looks at the presidential side of things as of now, there's a lot of conversation on both sides that the other one is going to destroy the country,
Right.
destroy the world.
Yep.
A lot of doom and gloom and fear, some joy, but also a lot of we're going to hell.
Right.
Does doing this show and talking with folks, has it changed your opinion or outlook on the state of things in both South Carolina and in the country? Or do you just curl up in the fetal position every night and hug your screen pillow?
Yes, I do that sometimes.
Yeah.
We have a lot of animals in this house, and so I take comfort in animals. I think that there were a lot of double haters before with Biden and Trump. And I think that Kamala has brought a lot more people out to vote. That will vote. I think that there are people. I just listened to a podcast that does focus groups, and there were a lot of people on the focus group that were double Trump voters who said, I'm exhausted by the doom and gloom. And We've just seen Kamala's policies, and they're different than Biden's. And there are, she's not as liberal as Biden. And one thing that I think people are starting to recognize, which I think is going to help her in the long run, is that she's finally gotten to be herself. And I think when she ran as president 4 years ago, she was trying to conform into this thing that she thought she needed to do to be a Democrat. And I think now, she's looking to the people like me, who she's like, I'm me. And I grew up in a way, she grew up very similarly that I did not. I don't have immigrant parents, but not in a very wealthy family. She went to public school. She went to college. She became a lawyer, which is a very different thing than I did, but she's followed this path, and now she's living her adult life as an upper middle class woman and married to an upper middle class man. And I think that in itself changes how you perceive things, and you combine your upbringing to where you live now and try to find a blend for both of those groups to live happily ever after and to succeed and have kids that succeed. And so I don't think I think people are seeing that. And I think she's been able to position that. So I don't think the doom and gloom is there so much, at least from people that I know that are Republicans that are now getting to see who she is and what her policies are. I still think it's there for Democrats toward the Republicans, though. And I think
Right.
Trump is getting worse and worse and worse.
And finally, Frogmore Stew.
Mm.
How often can you eat this?
Well, it
Is
depends.
it, as Cookie Monster would put it, is it a sometimes food, or is it an everyday food?
Are you familiar with Frogmore Stew?
I have looked it up. Yes, I know
Yes,
the
you must come to the
ingredients.
South and try Frogmore Stew. Frogmore Stew. So the reason that I always think Frogmore Stew, one is I love the blend of it. It's such unusual ingredients when you throw things together, and some people add extra things into it than others. But for the most part, it's the same ingredients every time, but they're very different ingredients, which is what I think politics should be. I think it should be a blend of sort of all different people blended in, melting pot, if you will. My husband, when he makes it, we have a big boiler pot. And there's this one time we had a large group of people at our house, and you have to do it by layers. So you add each thing at separate times, and it has to boil and all these things. And I went outside, and his hair was literally standing on end, and there were flames coming all over the place. And every time I hear the term Frogmore Stew, I laugh a little because I think of how sweaty and hair on fire type of moment that was for him. But you wouldn't want to eat it every day. I'll say that. It's got sausage in it.
Well,
Yeah.
and I'm pro sausage by
Same. Yeah.
I just feels like there should be some sort of sauce on all of it.
Oh no,
It's why I'm kind of indifferent to a lot of soups. Like give me a good thick, almost a gravy like consistency, and an
right.
aioli. Hell, let's keep it light. But like it's got to have something going on there,
That's a
doesn't
very
it?
northeastern. That's a very northeastern thing to say.
Well, I apologize.
Yeah, no, I'm kidding.
I am what I am.
Yes, it's
Yeah.
true. I do usually put out cocktail sauce though for the shrimp.
Okay.
And
Right.
sometimes I put out a little tartar sauce as well. But otherwise you add, we add Lowry seasoning, we add a bunch of seasonings. So the water basically infuses in all the things that are in it. So the potatoes have taste, have flavor, as does the shrimp.
Mhm.
Pretty good. I know I need to start bottling this, jarring this, right? And then I could send you a big
Well,
thing.
because it's such like it seems like I haven't heard of it. I've obviously growing up in New England, lobster, the
Sure.
idea of like cooking on the beach and burying everything.
Right.
I now live outside of Philadelphia, so the whole crab thing,
Oh
get
yeah.
it, understand. Frogmore, I feel like there's a jump and we go straight to Louisiana,
Well, that would be crawfish. And
right?
yeah,
But
I think
again, the idea of a seafood with some sort of meat involved, throw in some
Yep.
corn, there's always
Yep.
corn involved.
Corn,
It just,
potatoes.
yeah, it just seems like that part of the country gets ignored. We go from Baltimore straight to New Orleans.
Well, I think the best thing about Frogmore Stew is when you cook it, you put it on tables, sort of like when you do an oyster roast. So you dump it all out on the tables, and then everyone kind of comes around and picks at it. And so, sometimes the sausage goes away before the shrimp, and sometimes the shrimp goes away before the sausage, but
It's an
it's a
imperfect
gathering
system.
meal.
Right. I have a personally have an issue with food that calls for a plastic bib.
When are you coming to South Carolina next? Come visit.
Not soon enough, basically. Frogmore Stew with Grace Cowan is available wherever you get your podcasts. For more information, check out their website, frogmorestewsc.com, or you can find them on Instagram where they are at frogmorestewsc.
Why the Podcast is produced by the Professional Production Company. Please be sure to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts because we're shallow and need constant validation. For more information, you can check out our website, whythepodcast.com. And like everyone else, we're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Today's show was recorded and produced by Heidi Hedquist and myself from our world headquarters located on the second floor of the professional office building, centrally located downtown. Our reluctant executive producers are John Sauvé and Sandy Stone. Our willing producers are Rachel Allen and Randy Jeanette. Our intern is Zach Jackson. This one's for Philippe. Thanks for joining us. Flash, we're coming home.
Nigel, is that you? Are you here, Nigel?